Welcome to the Community ROI podcast. Here, senior community experts, founders, and C-level managers tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth about how a community impacts business growth. By listening to these conversations, you'll get actionable steps on how to connect community goals with business goals to skyrocket business growth while still bringing extreme value to community members. And my name is Yurii. I help people and brands shine through communities and personal connections. And my guest is amazing Luke Zimmer, the founders of Skariphos Consulting, where he, with a background in journalism, anthropology, and nearly a decade in the nonprofit world, brings both strategy and heart to community building and helps nonprofits and associations build inclusive, deeply engaged online communities. And Luke also is a beekeeper and an avid gardener who loves uncovering the surprising connections that make communities come alive. So, welcome, Luke.
Thank you, Yurii. It's great to be here.
Every time that I'm having a conversation with you, either it's a podcast or between two water coolers, I'm coming back to our community life conversation and chicken bowling and your beekeeping, and it was such an interesting conversation. And now we'll dive deeper into your experience, but from professional side, not that human
All right.
side. But however, who knows? It's always like people talk about work-life balance. I think community builders do not really have work life because it's kind of like life everywhere. So, the first question: what's your definition of a community for business?
That is a really great question, especially given the work that I do. Since most of the communities that I've worked with are for nonprofit associations, professional associations. Really, the business of community for us is creating membership value. So making sure that in those online spaces that members can get their professional questions answered, that they can connect with other professionals in their field, build those networks to either build their skill levels or to help them move up in their career, and to move along their own career trajectory. Um, so yeah, I think really from my perspective, the community is all about helping people to grow, helping people to learn, um, and it doesn't always feel like it's something that brings value to a business, but it doesn't just bring value to the association and to the association's members. It also brings value to those industries where associations are really serving their members well and helping them to define their career path, and also to define what their industry means and what that career means for people.
Like sometimes people are forgetting about this butterfly effect that you start with a small change and then it's like ripples everywhere. And people like who are in the community, they are talking to other professionals, they are learning, they are getting better in what they are doing. And then they impact so many people around them. And especially in nonprofit, if we are not talking about like profit makers, about like product companies, whatever, like people think, nonprofit, who cares? But then at the end of the day, like it still impacts everyone. So people are really like messing up with this.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and honestly, I think a lot of associations kind of served as a model for what community can be for businesses. Um, it's more than just a social media kind of connection, random things around some kind of basic interest. It's really a thing that is meant to help you grow and develop within your career. And a lot of businesses kind of have taken that model, and they not only provide their product or their service, but then they also provide all of these other ancillary kind of benefits around that using community.
so what's your definition of a community goal?
Uh, you stumped me already. Second question. So a community goal is one that either serves the growth of the community itself, or serves some kind of purpose for the community itself. But the best and strongest community goals are ones that ultimately tie into whatever your organization strategies are. So, definitely it's one of those things where, community can serve some kind of purpose, and that, like we're talking about, we can then measure, what kind of effect that, the community has had on that particular, goal or outlook for an organization.
So let's dive a little deeper. What is one goal of the communities that you are working with at the moment or worked before inspires you the most?
I really enjoy looking at how communities help organizations to retain their members or to retain their clients. That's one of the things that's most interesting to me. It's also sometimes it can be one of the harder things to measure in terms of tying the community to a person's reason for sticking around. But that's probably one of the things I love digging into most, because it is you not only have to understand the organization and the community, but you have to understand the people who are part of that community too. And so it just gives you an opportunity to kind of dig into people's motivations and to dig into like the psychology of your members in a way that, other community goals, like what is the growth of our community, like how many posts do we have, how many people have engaged with those posts, like those are all interesting things to answer, but really thinking about what is the motivation for people to stay involved in a community, and how can you kind of leverage that motivation to keep people closer to your organization or closer to your product.
No, I feel like there are a lot of like vanity metrics in the community world that people are talking about, specifically around engagement and about the number of posts or the number of answers. Because for me personally, itself, this number says nothing. It can be like thousands of messages, but it like can be hi, hello, how are you doing, whatever, and like leading nowhere. And it can be like just dozens of messages, but straight to the point that give immense value to all community members who are checking it. So I feel like it's also has to be like, to your point when you're talking about like retention, I feel like it has to be connected, like posts and value of those posts to retention. Because if you just measure number, who knows? But if you connect, yeah, I feel like it's really good. And also, I'm curious. You told about diving deeper into people motivations and kind of like understand them, see like what is the value that communities bring into them. So I'm curious, what specific actions do you take to reach that goal?
Yeah, so it's very much a qualitative effort. So it's honestly, one of the best actions you can take is just to be kind of involved in the community and to pay attention to it. But really you have to, and this is where my journalism background comes in. You have to be willing to like go and ask people. You have to ask them those questions. So sometimes when you're trying to find these deeper answers, you're going to have to implement something like a survey or a focus group where you literally ask people like, what kind of value do you assign to this community? But then I also really enjoy just finding like specific anecdotes or narratives from the community. So if you find, like you mentioned, there's, you've got all of these like thank you posts and these like random things, but then every now and then you get that gem that people just like latch onto, and everybody wants to be involved in that conversation. Everybody wants to reply to it. And those are the kinds of threads that tend to attract my attention as, essentially just like examples of value in the community. So digging into those and saying, even though this was one conversation and, just one post, there were all of these people who got this value out of it, and they stated it directly in the post in this way. I've lost my train of thought now, but it's kind of like, you have to be able to to kind of participate in the community and be a part of it a little bit, and then really develop your own relationships with the people who are in the community, and do exactly like we're doing right now. Talk about like, well, what is it that that brought you here? What is it that makes this community a place where you want to visit on a regular basis or participate on a regular basis? And so, yeah, it's not one of those things that you can just kind of like, pull your metrics and do your quantitative analysis and figure out what the value is. It's really one of those things that you have to kind of, you have to start asking questions, and even asking the right questions too, with people. So, yeah.
I've recently hosted this Ask Me Anything session. It's something that I tried for the first time, kind of like collecting questions from people from the community world, from business world, about how to connect and how to like understand community for businesses, etc. And one of the questions was, how do you encourage people to answer surveys? Because sometimes it's like a very common situation. Let's say you have 100 members in the community, you send a survey and you receive 2 answers, and like, what should I do with that? So I'm curious, like you, as you mentioned, surveying. What do you do to ensure that people are answering to them?
That If we can come up with an answer to that question, Yuri, we'll be rich, rich men. I mean, honestly, so usually you gotta give some kind of like uh, extrinsic reward. So if you can, say that there's going to be a drawing for a gift card, or like if you actually reply, you're going to get some kind of, you get a discount on a product or something like that. That tends to encourage people to participate. But I, um, I try not to put too much into surveys themselves. I
Hmm.
mean, surveys are a great way to get kind of that qualitative feedback at a larger scale. Um, but I often find that if you can do a focus group, or you can do just a series of one-on-one conversations with, 5 or 6 people from your target audience, they're going to give you like 80 or 85% of the things that you need to hear that you would get from a survey. It's not going to be as broad of data. It's going to be, but it'll get you much deeper insights into at least what those people are motivated to do. And generally, you can kind of extrapolate that then out to your other members. Nobody's the exact same person, but if you're hearing from 3 or 4 or 5 members consistently that there's a specific thing that your community does that provides them value, then it's likely that there are quite a few of your members who are bringing, experiencing the same thing.
There are a lot of conversations about focus group in like usual marketing, let's say, when they just collect random people just because they're of some age or some background, whatever, and they just like put them in the room and just pay them some money and they give them some answers. And I feel like in community setting, it's a little bit better because there are people there are people you have some relationship with. And still, I'm curious, how do you choose whom to invite to this focus group?
Yeah, frankly, sometimes it's whoever will say yes. I mean, you still run into the same problem. Like, people don't necessarily, want to spend the time doing those kinds of things because they're really busy. And they're like, what's the point in me giving you this feedback anyway? You're just going to do whatever you want to do. Um, yeah, but honestly, I think the folks that I would tend to lean toward are the people who are highly engaged. Trying to find some of those folks that are your biggest contributors to your community, or find some kind of metric that you all rely on. If it is like the number of posts or the number of replies, find the person who's submitting the most posts, find the person who's submitting the most replies, and then ask them to answer those questions for you. So you can kind of find those exemplary folks who are always are pretty good candidates for stuff like that. But then I also try to find the lurkers if I can.
Hmm.
Um, And sometimes it's a little bit easier with lurkers because, they're just kind of like in your community and they feel like nobody sees them and they're just kind of like doing what they want to do in there. But then when you, as the community manager, reach out to them and say, hey, I've noticed you're in our community. I've noticed you've been doing some of these things, and I really want to get your thoughts and your opinions on that. That can make somebody feel really special. And so I feel like sometimes it's a little bit easier to get those lurkers to give you some of their time. But then they also tend to have really good insights too, in terms of like, well, why haven't you taken this next step? Like, what is it that's maybe holding you back a little bit that that we could learn from, to get not just you to participate, but then other people, to participate as well. Because again, going back to like what I was saying before, if you find 5 or 6 of those people who um, haven't taken that leap into your community the way that you want them to, you can probably find 75, 80, 85% of the reasons why they're not participating, and you can start to try to correct those.
And also, I feel like those who are lurkers, they are acting a little bit as observers. So they are not active participants, but I feel like they are still paying attention. And something that many businesses and many communities are missing out on. They think that, oh, there are only 10 people active. But I had so many conversations. I saw so many posts on LinkedIn from like very well-known community managers, community builders who say that not everyone in your community will be active, and it's okay. You have to keep going. You have to keep creating value to them. And I feel like your advice is like the cherry on top, to go and ask those lurkers questions. Because yes, active members, yeah, of course they are doing something and you kind of like see what's going on, but usually you have no idea what's on the mind of lurkers, what's holding them back. And maybe nothing holds them back. Maybe they just love the way they are in the community and they don't want to change anything. And you think that you are doing something wrong as a community builder, but they are totally fine. They're happy because of that. So I feel like it's also very important to have this checks sometimes.
Yeah, well, and I love what you said. Like, sometimes we see that there's not a lot of activity, and so our first instinct is to like, how do I just juice that activity as much as possible? And that can be a mistake sometimes because even though you have a small amount of activity, that could be the right kind of activity, and quite frankly, the right amount of activity for the people who are in your community. But then if you just kind of jump into creating more engagement, more content without necessarily thinking about what it is that your audience wants, then that's where you start to run the risk of actually turning those people off. So instead of lurkers, they become expatriates and they've moved on to some other kind of community because you saw this metric where there wasn't enough activity, and so you're just trying to like flood the zone, and that isn't exactly what those folks want or need. So yeah, you have to be really careful with that.
And also for a really long time, my kind of like activity benchmark was CMX community or the community. So basically community for community managers. And I saw there are always a huge amount of posts. There was a huge amount of answers and questions. And I'm like, oh my God, it's amazing. I feel like it's the best example ever. That's how it should be every community. And then I start to work with community of founders or CEOs, or I start to work with community of freelancers or some busy people who are like who get value from the community. Still, they don't need to be there daily. And I feel like it's also a huge difference. And when people are asking like, what is the best benchmark for engagement? I'm like, I have no idea. I need to see like what your people are. First of all, who are you building community for? And like, secondly, what value are you bringing to them? And thirdly, like how much time do they have? And it's like super important things that people are missing. And they're like, oh, my community is silent. And then like, of course it's silent. It's like community of high level humans who want to also live, not just sit on your Slack or Discord or whatever you call it. And then like people, yeah, you're right. So
Well, yeah, and exactly to your point, I mean, it's really like the purpose of your community can kind of dramatically change what kinds of activity and metrics you're going to see in that group. Um, you know, there, it could be that you have a community where everybody wants to participate in the discussion boards, and everybody that wants to say something wants everybody else to see it. You could have other communities where, the activity isn't happening in, I guess, public facing spaces. The connections are happening one on one, and people are taking those connections from your community, and they're having private conversations that you as the community manager can't necessarily see. And so even though it looks like there's nothing happening in your community, all of this stuff is happening. It's just happening in spaces where you can't see it as the community manager. And so in those instances, your community is about not talking to each other so much as connecting people. And well, I guess those are also exactly the same thing now that I think about what I just said. But it's not so much that people want to display their thoughts and their feelings with everybody. It's that they want to make a genuine connection with another person and then go share those thoughts and feelings. And so those might be things that are happening in spaces that make it look like your community is crickets, but it's actually a beehive. So
Yeah, and you never know. Yeah, exactly, unless you ask questions. So
yeah.
I'm also curious. You're definitely working with some other teams, and so you have to encourage them. And you usually community brings a lot of value to them. So I'm curious, what three teams do you usually work the most with while building a community, and how does a community impact them?
Yeah, so you're talking like teams internally at the organization.
Yeah, mostly
Yeah.
internally.
Because I work with membership organizations, the number one team that I'm almost always working with is their membership team.
Mhm.
So they've got a group of people who are all about getting people to become members of the organization, to maintain their membership, or to upgrade their membership in some kind of way. And usually within the association space, their online community falls under kind of that membership or member engagement role. I'll also very frequently work with the marketing and communications teams. So often the association communities are leveraged to get the word out to folks about things. So their Marcom teams are pretty heavily involved in those. And I'm actually going to give you four teams, not
Okay,
three.
let's do it.
Okay, you get a cherry. I get a cherry on top of this one too. So the third team that I often frequently work with, this one might not be familiar to folks in the business world, but it's usually called their components team.
Hmm.
And so a lot of associations have not just their national organization, but they also have like state and local organizations as well. And a lot of the communities that I work with are designed to engage those components at the state and local level, and to help the national organization maintain communications and contact with them. And then the fourth team that I always work with is the IT team. Hands down, probably my favorite team to work with, because they're very to the point and like, what do you need? What do you want? Let's get it done. It'll be done in 2 weeks. Leave me the hell alone. And then I don't want to talk to you again. It's like, yes, those are my people. So
And I feel like you have to start with the IT team, because if you can't connect community members to any CRMs or whatever, if you can't divide them, like who are community members, who are not community members, it's so hard to track any metrics. And usually
yeah,
your go-to team is IT team, and you have to establish really good connections with them. And you also have to be a little bit straight to the point. So not just like kill them with storytelling, but really like, I need this data from this information, and I need this to be done. So like you have to be like very, very straight to the point. And I think that, yeah, so I think, once again, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that IT team still doesn't benefit anyhow from community. But I'm curious how other teams are benefiting from community.
yeah. So with the membership team in particular, the big thing Sometimes there is, at least with associations that I work with, sometimes their online community is a way to generate leads for memberships. Um, but more often than that, their online community is a member benefit. So you don't actually get access to their online community until you become a member of the organization. So for most of those teams, the community is serving as a way to essentially retain those members. So we're often looking at, with the members who have renewed their membership, how often do they participate in the community? And to what level do we think the community is influencing them to come back and to renew their membership? And so usually we see a pretty strong tie between online communities and member retention. And generally, in any kind of survey that an association will do of its membership, usually the online community is pretty high on the list of the member benefits that people get the most out of from the organization. It also tends to be the online community can kind of fill a lot of needs for people, which is probably, at least in my opinion, why it kind of ends up at the top of like the membership benefits. Because you can get networking out of it, you can get knowledge sharing out of it, you can get all kinds of things out of it that you wouldn't necessarily get from like a defined program, like a certification program or something like that. So, in terms of marketing and communications, that those teams are, honestly, since we talked about which team's the best to work with, those marketing and communications can sometimes be the hardest team to work with, because their goal is to get as many eyes on their message as possible. And so when they see the online community and they see, hey, I've got 10,000 members in my online community, their eyes light up and you see the dollar signs and they're like, oh, I can send a message and get to all 10,000 of these people. And sometimes you have to tell them like, hey, you need to slow your roll a little bit because the purpose of our online community isn't to advertise things. That's why we've got a newsletter, or that's why we've got a blog, or that's why we've got these other communications channels. And so often I have to work with those teams to say, we can talk about these things, we can market these things in the online community. But you can't just tell somebody about something. You have to ask them about something too. So it's like, if you want to talk about your national conference, you can say, hey, our national conference is coming up in November. We hope you register. But you can't just say that. You also have to say, what things do you want to see us do at the national conference? You have to get people to actually want to reply to those things. Otherwise, you just end up with, a random marketing message that, and I hate to see this, but you get that thread that's a marketing message and then it sits there for three weeks and doesn't get any kinds of reply. And it's like, that's not what we want in our online community. We don't want things that go nowhere. We want things that people are going to want to respond to and interact with. And yeah, at this point, I've been talking so much, I forgot what your original question was. So please repeat it.
Yeah, you already answered. You already answered like how those teams are benefiting from community.
Yeah, and then I mean, the other one, the components team that I had mentioned earlier, the biggest thing for them, and I might be putting words in some people's mouths here, but associations that have like state and local chapters and components, depending on how they're organized, usually those organizations are completely independent from the national organization. So even though they have the same name, they have their own staff, they have their own charter, they have their own bylaws, they have all of their own rules and things like that they need to follow. And it can be really difficult to essentially convince those state and local chapters that the national organization has some kind of holds some kind of value for them beyond just the brand that they're using. And generally, at least in my experience, like the most kind of like interpersonal conflict that I see in an organization tends to happen with layers like that, where, you know, the national organization says, hey, you know, we have this initiative that we want all of our state chapters to support. And then the state chapters, you know, half of them are on board. They're like, yay, this is great. And the other half are like, we don't want to do that. Like, why would we do that? Like, you guys don't give us anything. So, you know, really creating those spaces for those component staff and those component volunteers to not just connect with the national organization, but also for the national organization to really use those spaces to explain, well, we are doing this, but this is also why we're doing this. These are the benefits that we think it's going to bring to you as a state and a local chapter. And it gives a space for the national organization to really be able to convince and to sell those components on you know, participating in this broader initiative at a national level. There are also all kinds of other things just in terms of like streamlining like customer support. So a lot of, you know, on the flip side of the component setup, sometimes those components are all chartered and essentially run or have to, you know, report up to the national organization. And just because of the scale of that, especially in the United States, like, if you're going to have a state chapter, there are at least 50 of them. And if you're going to have local chapters, like around metro areas and stuff like that, you can have hundreds and hundreds of chapters. And it can be a real bear to support all of those different groups, especially if you're, you know, a smaller staff at the national or at the national level. And having an online community where folks can not only surface issues to the national organization, but then also work together to solve their own problems. It takes a huge burden of support off of the national organization when you have a structure like that. And as far as what the IT team gets out of it, they just like to make fun of us. So that's what they get. So.
And also it sounds like you are not just working with members, but you also are kind of like managing community of chapter managers, because like there are, like, as you said, like hundreds of them, and you have like different layers of your community and like different channels, and you have to, yeah, it's not that easy, I guess.
Yeah, it can get super, super complicated, especially with those big organizations, and God bless them all. They're doing God's work.
So it's clear, and it's something that I have from my experience and what I hear from you, and I heard from many other community experts, that community is kind of like this horizontal team, horizontal layer that helps many different teams within the company organization, and also serves a little bit like a glue for them, because it connects people from different teams and like makes them work together. And still, you also need help from others' team. So how do you usually ask for help, but in a way that you are not just adding more jobs, more work to other teams' plates?
Yeah. That's another good question. Well, I'm really lucky as a consultant. Usually I have somebody on staff who has to ask those questions for me, so I don't have to do it very often. I'm like, yeah, you need help with this. You need to go find somebody and ask them for help. They're like, oh, great, okay. But I think it's not a short-term solution, it's a long-term solution, but it's a community-based solution, and it's one that community managers are familiar with. And I think it's building relationships with those teams, and knowing that eventually we are going to have to ask somebody for help, and bring them into the loop. And it's much easier to do that if they know what you're doing. So making sure that you're not just working as a community manager in a silo, making sure that you're building spaces with the other members of your team to, even if you don't have a specific task that you need to get done on a regular basis, making sure that you're checking in with them, with everybody on like a monthly basis, or quarterly, and, you know, maintaining those relationships and trying to bring as much value to those other teams as you can as the community manager, so that when you need something from them, they're like, okay, well, you helped me do this, this, and this last month. I guess I can take some time to help you do this thing. I mean, and unfortunately, like you can't get around the fact that it's going to take time to do something. Um, but what you can do is make, that time valuable. And to, if you can prove your own value as a community manager to these folks, before you ask them for help, then when you do
Mm.
ask for help, they're going to be like, okay, fine, you're my man, let's do this. So even if it does take time.
And also to the point of checking in, how do you usually do this? So do you ask just, hey, how's your day going on? Or maybe you are talking about some specific metrics, wins, or maybe it's something altogether. Like how do you do this?
Yeah. So with those kinds of check-ins, I try to bring in as many people who touch community as possible and just say, hey, if you can make it to this meeting, please be there. And then always start off the meeting with like, these are the core metrics from our community for the last month. Asking people if there are other metrics that they want to see or if there are questions from the community that we can answer for them for their business. That's a great thing to do during those kinds of meetings. Um, and yeah, really just kind of creating that space where you're keeping people informed about the work that you're doing and the value that it's bringing to the team overall, so that when you ask them to help with that program in some way, it's much easier for them to see, okay, so if I help you with this, then this is the value that we're bringing not just to the larger organization but maybe also to my team as well.
And still, community is not always a bright side. It's also a dark side. So I'm curious, how do you talk about the challenges that you face, internally?
um, Oh, that's another one where you just kind of like you have to lean on those relationships and be honest with people. And because sometimes as a community manager, you have to say no. Like I was talking about with like the marketing and communications teams. Sometimes you have to say, this isn't the right fit for our community. And I really appreciate that you all are bringing this to us, but we need to think about how we can either reframe this or think about just not doing it at all. Um, and but the most often, I'm bringing people bad news when somebody's saying something in the online community that other people don't necessarily want to hear.
Mm.
And at least for me personally, it makes it a little bit easier because it's like I'm not saying this. This was Jane who said this, but I don't kill the messenger. I'm just the bearer of the bad news. But really, when it comes to like bad news, it's all about your mindset and how you frame it. You can say, hey, this is a roadblock, or you can say, hey, this is an opportunity, so it's either we're going to run into the brick wall or we're going to build a ladder together that lets us get over this brick wall. So it's our choice how we want to frame that.
I feel like also it's a part of what every community builder must have to see every feedback, like bad feedback or anything like that, as an opportunity. Because if you see it as a blocker, nah, it will suck and a lot. So
Yeah. Well, yeah, you and I have been around the internet enough to know that it's not all roses and puppies.
no, no,
That's
no,
for
no,
sure.
not just unicorns. Yeah. So
Yeah.
a lot of stuff happening. So I'm curious, like if we're talking about internet, it's like this topic of AI. So I'm wondering, do you use, and if yes, how do you use AI in your community building process?
Yeah. I do use AI. I don't often use it um, for like content development and stuff like that, just because I spent 4 years in journalism school learning how to write things and make graphics and do all of the communication stuff. So there's still a deep dark part of me that's like, I am not going to use AI to write this copy. I don't care how long I stare at this blank page. I'm going to come up with this idea by myself. Um, but I use AI for metrics and analytics, and especially with the platform that I work in most often, there are a ton of different reports, and they all kind of come from different angles and things like that. And I spend a lot of my time just kind of like tying together what these different data points mean. And AI helps a lot with that. You can essentially just plug your spreadsheets into, I use Google primarily for stuff like that. And then you plug your spreadsheet in and start asking it questions. And I'm like, this is fantastic. Like, now one problem that I've run into, even recently, like last week, I was doing this for one of my clients, and I was going through and I was asking the AI to just do some pretty simple math for me, like add up the number of posts that are coming from non-members versus the number that are coming from members. And I kept getting this response, and I was like, I was like, that doesn't feel right. And so I started like adding it up, and it was telling me that the total number of posts was less than if I added up the posts from members and non-members. Somehow it was adding in like an extra 100 things. And then I finally asked, I was like, why are these different? And then it just responded to me. I'm like, oh, great catch. My math was wrong. I'm sorry. I was like, oh God. So at that point I was like, okay, maybe I am going to manually crunch the spreadsheet's numbers a bit. But I think it's really interesting when it comes to like sentiment analysis and things like that. If you can like pull an export of the, the content of your discussion posts and things, you can start asking it questions about like, what's the overall tone in the community? When do people tend to post, and, what are the kinds of things they tend to post at certain times of day? Those kinds of like things that, I mean, we could crunch those numbers if you wanted to. You could go in and you could figure it out. But AI just does it so much faster. Even though it hallucinates sometimes and adds extra numbers here and there, overall, it's still a good tool. But it is still important to like double check, any of the work that AI does. So I guess long story short, I tend to find it's much better for me as a journalism major who never liked math. I took one math class in college because I had to. When it comes to like statistics and, metrics and things like that, I'm like, yes, please, AI, do this for me. So.
And I feel like it's something that's important that you mentioned, that it's always good to kind of like have your gut feeling if it's right, so not just rely fully on AI, but for example, like how I use when I have like the podcast conversation, I transcribe, I create a transcription of the text, and then I put it into ChatGPT. I remove all the data so it doesn't know who is this person, just have a general conversation without any sensitive information. And still, I know what we were talking about, and I still ask it to give me like bullet points of how the conversation was going, and like what was in there. And I can choose, instead of like going once again through the conversation, like, and finding these bullet points, I ask it to make me like 20 bullet points, and then I can choose 5 that fits the best. So, I'm still using my brain, and still I kind of like, it helps me to use it faster. And I feel like it's pretty much the same. So you can do math yourself and you can ask AI, and still you have this kind of gut feeling. If you like add up like 5 plus 5 plus 5, most likely it has to be 15, not 10. So you have this like general understanding, like maybe not the correct, like right one, but like general. So it's interesting. And the funniest thing that you also mentioned, that it's really good about sentiment. So AI is not that good at math, and it's better in human part. It's so crazy, but yeah, I totally get what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, it's a large language model, so I guess that just means it was a journalism major too. So
Very, 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 very large. And Luke, I wish to have the sky is the limit, but time is the limit. So the final question: what is one thing to do right away for someone struggling with identifying their community ROI?
The first thing I would do if you're struggling with that is to really sit down and think, what is the purpose of your community? What do you want your members to do? What is it that your community is supposed to be bringing to your customers, to your organization, to your clients, and then go from there. And so once you've figured out the direction you're supposed to be moving in, it makes it much easier to say, okay, well, these are the kinds of activities that we want to see. These are the kinds of activities that are going to bring value to the organization. And then you can start tying in community activities to those specific things and saying that, we've got this many replies to a post, and so that means that we're bringing whatever kind of value, to the organization and meeting that goal. But really focusing on what is the purpose of your community, what do you want people to get out of it, and that'll make it a lot easier to say, this is the ultimately the monetary benefit that we're bringing to the organization. So.
Last but not least, name 2 people I should reach out to talk about community ROI.
So you should talk to Catherine Hackney. I think you've probably talked to her before. And Matthias Fleming, I want to say. They're both members of the Community Consultants Collective, and they wrote an article. I believe it was the 2 of them who wrote an article recently on ROI specifically for association communities. So you should check them out.
Oh, amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. And what is the best way to connect with you?
With me, you can find me on LinkedIn, or you can send me an email. I don't know if my email address is on my little thing here. It's not.
But it's LinkedIn here, so it's totally good.
Yeah, LinkedIn's the best. Send me a message. I try to check it pretty often, but every now and then, ironically, as a community manager, I have to check out of social media and ignore it. So it might take me a minute to get back to you, but I'll get back to you eventually.
Ebbs and flows of profession. Yeah, sometimes you have to deal with that, but sorry, not sorry. And Luke, thank you so much. I feel like we've touched so many different topics and you added so many cherries on tops that I feel like this pie or this cake is just filled with cherries. And thank you for being so open and sharing like so huge amount of experience. And you're just the best. Thank you so much for being amazing you.
Well, thank you, Yurii. Yeah, and I know we mentioned when we were talking beforehand, like I've been doing this for a while, but I still feel like an amateur. And after this conversation, you have reminded me I do know some things. So
you do know exactly. And thank you so much, and see you in the community world. And thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions about how the community can help you reach and overcome your business goals faster, let's connect on LinkedIn and talk about it. That's it. We're done. See you in the next episode.